Welcome everyone to this episode of Capital HQ. I'm thrilled to welcome Bastian Buch, Executive Product and Tech Advisor at Philips Byrne, to explore the critical world of metrics and tech. He's first going to give a presentation on that, and then we'll go into a bit of a Q&A. So with an illustrious career spanning quite a few years, Bastian has left his mark on leading companies like Zalando, Delivery Hero, and Omio. And as a co-founder of the Mentoring Club, he's also deeply invested in nurturing tech talent across the globe. Today, Bastian will share his insights on the power of metrics to transform tech strategies, drive innovation, and steer companies towards success. So get ready for quite an enlightening conversation that will deepen your understanding of tech metrics and their pivotal role in shaping the future. Welcome, Bastian.
Hey, thanks for having me, Hugo. I'm very, very happy to be here and share a few of our thoughts on how we work at Philips Byrne, and also my experience with working in tech. Of course, we can go like 3-4 hours instead, right? So I'm really touching focus here, but I think in our Q&A afterwards, we can really dive into some of these areas. All right, so I think I can skip this. So you already introduced me. Maybe a few words about Philips Byrne. We are a consulting company doing like tech DD, sales checks. We help investors, founders to really shape the organization with that, their products, and with that, the future. Yeah, super happy about that, and really KPIs, metrics, and how to set these up in a growth environment is kind of very close to our hearts, because that's what we do every day. All right, so metrics in tech, or metrics just in general. Let me start with like setting a bit of light on what are metrics and what they are not. It seems so obvious, but we see that a lot of companies, a lot of teams, a lot of managers kind of use them not in the best way possible, let's say. And let's say metrics are a good compass for management steering. They are a tool for self-improving the organization, teams, the product, and a good way to align goals, ambitions, and priorities to grow a company into being more of a kind of, some of more autonomous entities, which is the foundation for growth. However, metrics are not micromanagement tools for teams, individuals. So it's not about like going into teams and like trying to manage individual things, aspects of a team just by using metrics. It's also not the cure for evil, because in the end, they are not the goal, but just a means to an end. So even if you have, for example, OKRs and set yourself KPIs, the KPIs that you're using is a language with it, like a means to an end, right? So you are trying to bring everyone together by using that metric, but the actual goal is something different. It's a real change within the company. It's a real change within the world, but it's measured by KPI, and the KPI can be wrong, needs to be improved, and so on. So don't use the KPI as the only thing that you see when you talk about goals, right? In a lot of cases, we see that organizations try to implement metrics and KPIs and just stay at a very, very high level, the surface level, and think that by having KPIs, they're doing everything right. We believe that in the end, it's a cultural aspect, and everyone in an organization that wants to use metrics as an operating system, let's say, to grow, need to understand the system behind, right? And here's just like 2 areas which are very important to understand, that when we talk about metrics and KPIs and targets and goals and so on, in a lot of cases, these are used as like almost synonyms, but they're not, right? So you need to understand the cascade of things. Metrics, just numbers, then KPIs that are like key performance indicators. So what are the metrics that you want to use that make you understand how your business, how your team, how your product performs in a specific market, right? Metrics is like almost everything that you measure. KPIs is a subset of those, or even just a ratio of different metrics to make you understand how the business goes. The target then is just like a KPI and where you envision it to get to. So define KPIs as indicators for success and failure in a specific time, in a specific case. And then you set specific goals, specific strategies to you want to leverage to accomplish business objectives, right? And understanding this makes it more easy to to communicate and to discuss certain things within your organization. Because in the end, you have business people, you have product people, you have tech people, you have managers, you have individual contributors, and bringing all of this together needs a specific framework. This is one of those. Another one is on the other side, on the right-hand side of my slide here, which is understanding, and I know it looks very obvious, but in the end, it's not, to understand what are you actually talking about. Is the KPI that you want to put in the center of your, like, let's say, intention in a specific meeting, is this an input? Do you measure process? Do you measure the output? Or is this all about impact? And specifically for setting goals and targets, this is super important because you want to know, and you also want to align everyone behind that thinking, if the leverage that you currently see is on the input side. Right? So for example, as a company, you might see that hiring more people makes things better because currently you have a lot of bottlenecks in your engineering. Oversimplifying here, but in the end, it's an input, right? How many people can you hire? It's not the outcome, it's not the output, but you leverage the input. In some other cases, especially when you already grew, this input is actually not what you want to leverage, but you want to leverage the outcomes. You need to know more, think about, okay, how can we actually say more no to specific priorities? And measuring those means that you need to have a great understanding about what is the value of each of the initiatives, each of the features, each of the systems that you're running. And then you can have an impact on the actual outcome overall, right? So that being said, there's another framework, and that's something that we use quite a lot when we speak to founders and leaders within organizations, which is looks a bit complex here, so let me try to step back a bit and simplify. So when you have an entity, whatever it is, might be a team, might be an organization, might be the whole company, might be a product or just a feature. You always have two perspectives on those. One is the perspective from the outside. So how do you know that this is successful? Right? For a company, it might be the market share. For a team, might be, I don't know, the feature adoption rate that of the features that the team is building. Might be also some quality measures, like how many bugs does the team produce, also, and so on. And then you have a different perspective, which is from the inside out. And this is only what is part of that entity looks into in order to improve. So there's an evolutional metric or evolutional perspective for teams, for products to improve over time, right? So the outcome of that will be eventually and hopefully be more performant outside in view. But in order to get there, you need to grow. One example for that is discussed in a lot of companies, which is velocity. Right? Velocity is a very typical evolutionary metric, which is only true for one specific team and cannot be compared across teams. But there are managers out there, there are companies out there that use that specific metric as a KPI to measure team success and to measure if teams perform. And then they even start to compare specific or the different teams with each other. That's not possible, right? So in the end, that's a metric that the team owns, uses in order to become better, but it's not something that tells you anything about the actual success and performance of that specific team. Right, and you can apply this framework across like all different layers of company, roles, products, as said. In the end, the important part here is that you always need to know what are you actually talking about. Is this a metric? Is this an aspect that speaks about a specific, about the impact of a specific entity, or is it something that speaks about the growth of a specific impact? as a manager of a team, for example, like let's say a VP of engineering, and you have multiple teams, you should be interested if teams use metrics like velocity, but it's not a measure that tells you anything about the performance of a team. So leave that to them and really look more into the quality that they produce, the impact that their features have, and so on. Then when you go into a specific tech team or product engineering team, the curation of the optimal set of operational metrics is super important. There are different starting points here, and I would really say if you're a startup, you should just start by using those and then adapt over time, add more things like, for example, the DORA metrics or the space metrics. They talk a lot about the team, right? Evolutionary metrics that speak about, okay, how does the team work, and is there anything that they can improve in order to create better products? But then there's also system metrics that you need to find. The most important thing here is that you should not only look into one thing and just measure for the sake of measuring because someone else told you or because there's a specific system like DORA, but really understand what is the system that you're in and then try to capture the overall system. I tell you why. Here's a little video of a very simplified team system, let's say, right? There's trust in the team, psychological safety, engineering happiness, but also something like external things like the customer happiness or the work in progress, speed of iteration. And I try to model here how these different elements relate to each other. And in order to understand this, you need to have metrics, right? Measuring the work in progress is kind of easy, but customer happiness is not just something that you say, yeah, our customers are happy because we read so in our app reviews, but something that you need to measure. And then you really can understand how certain things belong to each other. And why that? Because not to have the numbers, but because you want to find how you can actually optimize the system. So if you see that that the employees, that the team members in the team become unhappy because you measure so, then you find out, okay, there are other things that might impact those this element. Bottom line here, really see that you measure the overall system, team health, quality, infrastructure, application, and also product, and just don't ignore a certain level here, layer here. One thing that a lot of teams do is not really looking into product metrics because they say, this is for designers and product people or business people, but not for us. We look only into infrastructure. I think that's not good. We need to see both things. One example that we can also speak later but on is cost for infrastructure. So you measure the cost of infrastructure, but just having a number of like whatever costs 5 million euros doesn't tell you anything. But if you bring the customer and the product into it as well as a ratio, will tell you much more, which is like let's say cost per million euros in revenue, or cost per customer, cost per just traffic, right? And with that, you get a ratio and you get an understanding of here's how we can optimize the overall system. All right. Product analytics, I already started to talk about that. Especially in the SaaS context, where people build, for example, developer tools or just very technical products, they tend to, not everyone is doing it, but they tend to not really apply traditional product metrics, product analytics, as we can call it, right? Like, I don't know, engagement metrics, even conversion rates, user journey metrics. And we believe that especially in a SaaS context, where of course it's very difficult to measure these metrics because you don't have the high amount of customers, it's super important to focus on these, right? Because in the end, there are certain elements, certain decision points that you want to still make, and not just out of gut feel, but because you measure so like user adoption and satisfaction of your customers, And in order to understand, is there features that you want to sunset? How can you actually sunset those features? Because you, in the end, have to see the whole product development life cycle. And just saying a feature is not there anymore does not mean that there are no dependencies and customers still using it and so on, right? So it's very complex. And in order to understand that and measure this and manage this right, you need to have product analytics here. Also, pivoting is a thing, right? To understand, okay, are users using your features in the way you intended them to use it, or are they actually ignoring specific features and so on? And with that, you get the story behind how the user actually uses your tool to solve their problems. And there might be areas where you want to pivot and just like really do things in a completely different way. A huge topic also in our world at Philips Byrne is developer experience, right? So a lot of companies nowadays, and since already many years, build their product not just with a UI for certain people, but also with an API and with ways for developers of the client companies to use the features in an integration scenario. And measuring developer experience is super important, not just internally for your people, but also externally to understand, okay, how are actually developers using your tools or your APIs? Are they happy with what they have? Are they happy with the documentation? How do they actually onboard? How do they test this? And so on, right? To really go into that as well. So the next question, or one of the biggest questions that we always get, be it now in the consulting context or as a manager of a specific company, is actually how can we introduce metrics? Right? You started somehow, you've been a small team, everyone knows what to do. A lot of things become, a lot of decisions are made based on gut feel on just like because you know the path forward, right? And at some point you believe that, or you see that introducing metrics is an important point. And here are a few things that we can mention here. Start with your culture, mentioned this already, right? So understand the systems behind how you make decisions, really push to not only base your decisions based on opinions, but on facts. This is especially true and hard for founders who, of course, need to have an opinion. They need to have a vision of where the company goes, but putting facts over everything is super important, especially when you have more and more people coming into your organization, right? Establish scientific approaches, A/B testing, for example, not just like look at the numbers, but really understand what is significance, how do you use these things is important. Yeah, and then of course, when you, I don't know, create slides, create documentation or narratives, whatever way you go for documenting things, really invest into creating insight and proper reasoning. So it's all part of the culture that needs to be behind that, because without that, metrics always will be just a side thing, right? Second point is agree to what to measure, right? So come together as management team on all different layers, right? Executive, but also in a team, product manager and engineering manager, for example, also team, and together agree what is important, right? So I showed you the cascade of things, right? From input to outcome. We look at the system that you have, the problems that you might have, or the areas that you want to improve and grow in, and then agree what to measure. It's so easy to measure everything with all the tools out there, but it's super difficult to understand what is important at this specific point in time and then start to measure those. Another element, especially in startups, in bigger corporations, might be more difficult, is democratizing data, right? So try to collect everything, try to make it anonymous, right? Of course, we are not talking about personal data, but then make this available to everyone so that they can query the data, that they can experiment with it, build their own Python scripts to visualize specific elements, right? And with that, make it easy for everyone to understand how the product works, or how the team works, how the system looks like. Because with that, you will get the creativity of the people back in the end, right? Thinking holistically, I already mentioned that, right? Not just look into infrastructure, but really see the whole thing. If you're a sales-heavy product, make sales available sales data available to people. If marketing is your current thing because you want to grow, make the marketing narrative visible and manageable by using metrics and KPIs. So always see the overall picture. People development as the next element. It's just not true, right, to say, okay, we are working in a startup and everyone understands metrics the same way. No, make them understand how metrics work. Make them understand what is the conversion rate in our context. Make them understand how to use the data warehouse that you might use. So invest into making people able to understand, use, and make sense out of the data that you have. It's an investment that is absolutely worth it, because it will just bring everyone behind the same goal, A, and B, as said before, you will unlock the creativity of many here. Yeah, and phased rollout is also important. It's a bigger change, right? So you need to look into, okay, what is the right starting point for that? Start with, I don't know, having a metrics meeting every week with the management team in order to understand where you stand, and then roll it out to more people. If, for example, you are already quite data driven, but your tech teams are not, then maybe as tech managers, engineering managers, you can start by just releasing one very simple, lightweight data story every week, so that everyone starts to understand, okay, this is the impact that our products are doing, but not do not more, right? So it's all about finding the right things or the right iterations to make the change successful. And yeah, last but not least, I have a few best practices and anti-patterns that we collected over the years that might be helpful for you to know beforehand, right? So prefer push over pull situation, right? So just having the data somewhere and believing that everyone just goes into it is probably not the right idea, right? So there might be people who are interested in getting the data, but if it's hard, not everyone will do it. So I told you about the data stories that you can release every week. Bring the data to your people, make them understand. Right? See this as, especially as a manager, or if you're leading a data team, for example, make this your responsibility to really bring the data to the people. Don't wait. Don't wait for people finding where they can find the data. Right? Another one is absolute numbers. So I've seen a lot of cases where KPIs were just absolute numbers. Cost is a good example. I already spoke about that. Put, whenever possible, things in ratios. Can be different ratios, right? So in order to understand how things correlate with each other, that in the end will then unlock the patterns within your organization, within your product, that might be worth investing into. Just absolute numbers don't tell you anything, because you don't have a connection point here. And this is even true for the team invest that you do, right? So if you have a certain understanding of what is the value of your product, and you know how much you invest in your team by just summing up the salaries of people, you have a ratio that is super helpful, because you understand what is the return on invest. Really quite a useful and well-known metric, but a lot of companies don't do it. And I think it's absolutely worthwhile to do it in order to understand where to invest into, what are the biggest, say, fruits to find, right, in your organization. Prefer visualizations to create insights. Just looking in, like, if you have a metrics meeting or like quarterly business reviews or whatever you have in your organization, just opening a table, a spreadsheet, in most cases does not make the trick. Look at trends and look at correlations means you have to have some kind of a visualization in order to talk about insights and not just about the data, right? An example here was it's like when you look into data and you see it's going down for a week, doesn't tell you anything, you can just like freak out and say, oh, let's look into this more. But if you have a bigger line and you see, okay, actually there's always a drop at the weekend or every other week there's a drop, but overall the trend goes up, then you can relax, right, and actually go to the next thing, because there is no insight. It's just the data that tells you something, or which is not relevant. Yeah, combine metrics into dashboards. I think it's clear. Standard tooling, especially in the beginning, right? Don't invest into building your own dashboard or building your own visualizations. Really try to use as much standards as possible, because it's your company is about building a specific product and not about building dashboards, right? So I use standard tooling here, which makes it also easier to change later. Yeah, I think a lot about the right visualization. I had this already. Colors, chart types, consistently. This is important, right? Not having a different language just because you have a different person and they are just a different team. So make this part of your company DNA to like know when there's a line and there's I don't know, a red mark somewhere, that everyone understands, oh yeah, this is the same across the board, and people don't use things in different ways. On the avoid side, already spoke about some of these, like micromanagement. Does not, just makes it worse, right? It's a cultural anti-pattern here. Why did the team have 5 story points less in the last week? Might be a good question, but it's not a question that is relevant. Metric paralysis, too many metrics, clear time frames. I spoke about that, right? The weekly dip, is this relevant when the overall trend is positive, right? So zoom in, zoom out, drill down, drill out. So seeing the whole picture is always important. And yeah, the isolation of metrics is also one thing, right? So ratios is one way to do it. Another is really to have dashboards that put things in correlation, right? You see, okay, here's the product metric goes up, but at the same time revenue goes down, and you put an infrastructure metric there as well, or a quality metric, right? In order to really see, yeah, this is the overall pattern, this is what it tells us, and then you can make better decisions. So isolation, just because you have teams in isolation doesn't work. Question metrics, of course, super important, right? So you always need to question it. Is actually the conversion rate the right thing for us, or is it something different? Does the conversion rate, as we look at it, really matter, or does it tell us the whole story, or do we need to change it in its meaning and with that in its mechanics? Always do that, evolve them whenever possible. Yeah, and then last but not least, and I started with this, is of course, metrics, that just means to an end, it's not the goal. And with that, you cannot ignore your intuition, right? Sometimes you need to push forward in order to understand what's happening. You need to bring your experience in order to, yeah, in the end, it's human work that you're doing, and metrics only help you to get to common language, let's say, to drive decisions. All right. I think that we can send out or make this available to everyone who sees this talk and the Q&A. Here's some useful resources that might just help you to deep dive a bit deeper into that. But yeah, as I said, we can definitely make those available to all of you. All right, that was it from my side for now, and I'm now happy to answer your questions, Hugo.
Thank you very much, Bastian, for the insightful presentation. And yeah, the resources you've added there at the end, I'll add it into the description so people can have access to those. I'll also put your contact details as well as Philips and Byrne's contact details there. So if anyone wants to get in touch and dive deeper into those, that'd be great. Well, look, I think you've gone into a deep dive into metrics. I just want to take it back a bit in terms of you. First of all, how did you get into this sort of industry? And let's say, how has your perspective of the importance of metrics evolved since your start?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question, because it's indeed an evolution, right? So when you start somewhere, you're like very energetic. You go into products, you see what's going on there, and you are very opinionated. Right? And I see this also with a lot of founders out there who are like young and like start something. But over time, I understood that being led by intuition and being led by metrics is not like a black and white view on the world. Actually, you need to combine both because, as I said in my talk, the metrics give you a language and give you signals to prove your intuition, prove your gut feel, and then drive better decisions. I think that really developed over time when you are in more complex scenarios, right? In bigger companies where there's not just 12, but maybe 40,000 people, right? And then you have to drive a decision like, okay, do we actually need to platformize this? Do we need to invest into reducing the cost of this and that, let's say, infrastructure? And yes, you can always say, yeah, I believe that because I see it's very, very costly, right? So I've seen other things before, and why don't you believe me? Whatever. But if you then use metrics, you get to a certain language. And so in a lot of cases, also investing into understanding more about the actual opinion that I formed by using metrics led me to a conclusion that actually my opinion was not right or was only partly right, and also informed me. Another element that I really, that I learned and really liked and leveraged today is the value of KPIs for leadership. I'm not speaking of management, but leadership, right? Especially in tech, people oftentimes don't know what they actually produce, what's the impact of things, right? And what I did, for example, at Omio, quite a lot is really myself going into the data warehouse and getting data out and making understanding, okay, how many tickets, right? It's a ticketing platform for buses and trains. How many tickets did we sold today? And then putting this into context. How many trains did we actually, like if you put the tickets and then how many trains did we make full over the last week? And then sharing this with the engineers. And this in the end helped them to identify with the product, with the company, and make them proud about what they actually do there every day. Right? Because what they see is code, they have all these challenges and bug fixes and technical debt and so on. But investing into those and having these data stories made it tangible and is a great leadership tool.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we find it a lot. I'm sure you do as well. When companies, when founders are asked during the due diligence process about different metrics, some of them who haven't installed it need to spend at least 1 or 2 weeks getting it all together. And it's really important for investors. So I think, it's one of the things that we usually tell our founders, have you got this metrics ready, etc. But I think one of the interesting things I want to get to is you've worked at large tech organizations. Zalando is an example. Are the metrics different at different state, as in is the importance of specific metrics different for different stages, or is it still very similar depending on the stage in terms of the most important metrics that the executive team need to have a look at?
So of course, right, the mix of KPIs is different, as I outlined before. You might measure the same things, but in the end, what you look into, the actual KPIs, key performance indicators, is different because you have a different, different focus, priority as a company, right? While a growth startup might look into just growth and ignore profitability, at least for now, a bigger company where the cost can be extreme and the growth is not so big anymore, you want to look into profitability, right? With that, of course, the focus changes. Another big difference, of course, is that it's way more difficult to give a holistic perspective to everyone in the organization, right? So at Zalando, I led a platform team quite far away from the actual product. And obviously there were metrics like, conversion rates and engagement metrics and so on, but they were in a complete different department, complete different area of the organization. And it was very hard to say, okay, what we do here and how it relates to how customers use our product was almost impossible. Right? So you need to find ways to still tell these stories and make this available. The silos that form in bigger organizations are good for some ways, right? Because you don't need to discuss everything with everyone. But at the same time, there is distance created, and it's very tough, right, to bring metrics to everyone. And I think this is a fundamental responsibility for leaders and managers in these organizations to connect the dots, right? So I'm leading this organization, need to go out to the marketing people, understand, okay, how do we actually make revenue with the data, right? When people click on certain advertisements on, we were speaking about Zalando, how do we make revenue here? What does it mean if, for example, certain elements in our backend, when we measure events, get lost? What's the impact on revenue, right? And I need to understand this complex, let's say, scenario in order to bring the people in my teams along. So this is very, very more difficult, and with that, the let's say, the challenge for leaders is more into that, right? And in a smaller startup, of course, it's very, very easy because founder, when they speak about that, you have dashboards available for everyone. So it's more like a very easy, hands-on or organic approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, can you share maybe an example from your time at Omio where a specific metric significantly influenced product development or strategy?
Yeah, so of course cannot go into like lots of details here, right? Not talk about how the company strategy looks like. But one thing that I can say is during my time there, we made a quite big decision on investing into flights, right? So it's a ground transport platform doing a lot of like, for bus and trains mostly. But we also saw that it's very difficult to become a global platform because ground transport and trains and buses are by definition local businesses, right? Mostly local businesses. You cannot go with a train from here to New York, right? So you need to have something in between. And what we've seen is that people use it once when they travel, maybe coming from the US, use it once to take a train, but they never use it again because they only fly to Europe every, whatever, seven years, right? So what we understood is actually we need to find something that combines those local markets, and this is only flights. And this is what we really made to measure, right? Okay, when we have people searching for flights, do they use the platform that we have even more in their local markets, right? And this was definitely one area where looking at the metrics, looking at how the customers behave, made us then decide to invest into flights and making flights a product of our company.
Yeah, it sounds like, yeah, I mean, metrics sounds like it's been a lot of influence on that. And look, another one of your personal experience, right? So you've successfully reduced cloud costs by implementing cost metrics at Zalando. Can you guide us through that process as well? I know you probably have a lot of different examples, but if we can maybe focus on that one for a second, because it was a significant amount of savings as well.
Yeah. So first of all, it was not me, right, reducing costs. It was about the team.
Yeah, of course.
The difficulty here was that there was a system that cost like 12-14 million a year in terms of infrastructure. And we measured, and I outlined this before in my talk, we measured total cost against budget. And when you do that, right, your reference point is actually not the right one, because when you say I have 15 million in budget and your cost is 12 million, you just change the budget with the growth that you have in the end, you are in a way lying to us. So what we did was actually trying to find a way to measure let's call it kind of the return on investment, to find a mechanic that tells us about how efficient is this cost, right? And what we did is like trying different KPIs here, and we ended up with having cost per million events, because the machine that we actually speak about is a kind of a stream machine where customer clicks, customer engagement, right, goes through. And we found out that actually there's a lot of variation in that. So by looking at that number, we understood actually when this is not stable, then there must be ways to reduce that, right? And we looked into the architecture, we looked into the infrastructure for ways to optimize this. And then we just used this metric as a guide for us to experiment with certain hypotheses that we had on the infrastructure. And in the end, right, so long story short, we iteratively reduced the time by almost 50% overall. over half a year by not changing how many events go through that, but actually by changing how the RAM was, the memory was used, how the architecture was designed on the back end, and so on, right? So there were a lot of different things that we were doing. The important point here was really that we had a measure that told us the variance of things, how things relate to each other. This, in the end, also helped me to rationalize the invest into that area so that I could get, like, the buy-in from my managers and the managers of their managers to say, okay, the team is busy in optimizing that part, so we don't have enough capacity for other things, but this is worthwhile looking into because we save 5 million or more than 5 million year over year, and in the end, this will amortize itself, right? So this was really, I think a good example for how you can actually make things tangible by doing metrics and not just like your gut feel.
Yeah, data rules the world. And look, in regards to just generally, right? What do you feel is the most underutilized metric in tech product management, and why should teams pay more attention to that metric?
I think one of the most underutilized metric is developer experience internally, not the one that I mentioned before in the SaaS context, but really internally. Developer experience might be misunderstood as happiness and people need to have a good time at work and so on, but I think it's not. It's like, do they have the right tooling? Is the onboarding that they have right? The decisions that are being made, building or buying certain things or whatever, right? All of these need to be well understood, and especially when you grow larger as an organization, you will have it's called kind of a microservice architecture in your organization, right? So you have a team that builds something that another team uses. So, and then developer experience becomes even more important because that team that builds something, in a lot of cases, I've seen that, they think, okay, the other teams need to just like take what we build because we believe it's good. But if you put developer experience as a cultural measure for you to, evolve your organization, then the other team needs to think about, okay, is the documentation that we write about that specific element that we provide to other teams, is it good? Is the API well understood? Do we use the the right standards here? And so on, in order to not just provide some piece of technology for others, but also make it useful, make it great, make it, improve the culture, right? And this is specifically true for teams that have which purposes it is kind of to maintain and implement external tooling, external platforms. For example, localization is one thing, right, where you translate text elements. They look a lot into, okay, how do editors, marketing people use this tool in order to translate their copy, but in the end, this tooling needs to also be integrated in the product, in like whatever your landing page machine is like, or whatever, right? And this element of developer experience cannot be forgotten because there's a lot of frustrations in it, right? If implementing or integrating an external tool, also an internal tool, is hard, right? Is heavy lifting for them, then it will just reduce the happiness in the team, the engagement of them, and also the adoption to that new technology that you want to introduce. So looking into developer experience, I think is fundamental, especially in organizations that grow and then create these dependencies.
Makes sense. And you mentioned earlier, metrics are not a cure for all evil, right? And they're not the goal, but a means to an end. But a lot of the time, also metrics often tell a story beyond simple numbers, right? Can you maybe describe a situation where you use metrics or your organization use metrics to craft a compelling narrative for stakeholders? Perhaps it swayed a strategic decision or highlight an overlooked success.
Yeah, I mentioned the one with the flights and trains and Neo, right? I think these were good examples. Let me think about another element. Yeah, so my time at Delivery Hero. Yeah, this is actually a super interesting one. We looked into conversion metrics, right? It's very simple. People order food, put it in their basket, add their address, click a button, and then some rider comes to them and delivers the food. What we've seen is that across different markets, and the platform was built from for products for South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Pakistan, Sweden, Germany, right? So in a lot of different cultures, that conversion rates were very different, very, very different. And we did not understand why. And we looked into that and we compared those and we made like drill downs into, okay, why is actually, I think it was Pakistan, but doesn't matter so much, was way more below that. And the user behavior seems to be off. And we first thought that there's a bug. And we made a kind of big bug bash and big, like, deep dives into what is wrong here. We didn't find it. And in the end, we found out that actually the user behavior is different. People have a different understanding, have a different learned behavior of when and where do they put their address, when do they want to decide which payment method they use, and so on. And with that, right, it was a great way to say, okay, I think we need to invest into feature management. So to actually make one product, not one size fits all, but actually make it manageable in a way that we decide per market, per brand, how the conversion flow looks like. And yeah, this I think this is a good example, right? So just look, conversion rate, yeah, very simple. We need to just optimize for that. But if you really go deeper, you see, actually, it's very different from culture to culture, from product to product.
So it gave you, yeah, it's crazy how metrics can highlight those cultural differences as well.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
And look, with regards to, because at Philips and Byrne, you guys are well known for your tech due diligence, right? So how do you recommend investors balance hard metrics with qualitative insights, maybe such as team dynamics or product innovation, and making informed investment decisions?
Yeah, as said before, right? It's always a holistic thing, and I can tell you, tech due diligence is about tech. Yes, it's about kind of very mechanical things, like say, okay, we need to have this and this in place. But the major piece of it is almost therapeutic, right? So it's almost looking into, okay, what are the different people in the company all about? What kind of roles do they have, and so on. So the qualitative aspect is even more important. Now for us, the difficulty is how do we make this measurable? Because in the end, no one cares if we say, yeah, they are fighting about certain things again and again, right? And this might be attention. This is not something that an investor can use. So what we do actually is trying to rationalize those observations by having a score. So we have a score in place that tells the investors all about like organization, leadership, all the different aspects in the company. We have 12 different areas and sub areas. And how we do it, we have a standardized way to score certain elements of this companies by having like standardized questions, standardized observations, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to many details here, but this helps us then to give a perspective of the company, which tells like, here is elements that you need to look into. Here's elements that might be, I don't know, problematic. We can translate those into recommendations to improve. And even more important, we can benchmark those, right? Because we can say, okay, a Series A company in a fintech environment in Europe looks like that. And here we have a different company, and how they benchmark against those then will tell us, okay, is this correct, what we look into here, but also the investor, how like a certain target company that they want to look into performs on a qualitative level, right? And again, as outlined before, it's just a way to find the same language here.
Great. And look, with regards to Philip and Byrne, how do you mentioned it a bit there. I'd love for a bit of a deeper dive from you. How does Philip and Byrne tailor its approach to tech due diligence with a focus on metrics? And for startups and VCs listening, how can they engage with you to leverage your expertise in that?
So yeah, as I said, we look into many different areas, and what we do is we do always two major, let's say, streams into looking into company. One is looking into what we call a virtual data room, right? So we get a lot of data, we get source code access, we get access to their Jira or Asana, and we have ways to get the data out of it and then create insight metrics. We have standard ways for that, and this is what we look into. We invest a lot into automation in that regards, right? To really make a sense out of what the company is currently producing, not just from a product perspective, but also of code, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of documentation, in terms of roadmaps, and so on. So this is one element, and obviously there's a path moving forward, right, which comes with AI, which makes it even more important to do that. And then the other element is to prove these and to question these and to challenge these together with key people within the organization. So for DD, we usually do like 5 to 11 interviews, certain formats like from a leadership, but also code walks with people to really look into things and then find the right balance between what is the truth here, what is the actual insight that we want to give to an investor. For a company to also prepare for tech due diligence is actually from the beginning make one thing key in your understanding, which is that as a founder and as a leader, you're not building a product. What you're doing, you build a company that creates great products. It's very important, very different perspective, right? And if you understand that what you do is actually building a company to build product, is that you need to invest into all of these elements that create leverage and scale along the way. Of course, a product can scale, right? Product scale is a complete different perspective here and a complete different way of looking at something. But creating a company that scales and leverages is even more important, because a product can only grow to a certain let's say goal, but what comes after that is only possible by having a great organization. And that being said, and that's what we look into. That's also what investors are interested in. Not so much interested in the current product. Obviously, this is one element, but what they are more interested in is how the team is, their experience in scaling teams. What is the team setup? What is the organization? What kind of dependencies do they have? Blah blah blah. And this already gives the answer of how to prepare for DD, which is just like focusing on your company, focusing on documentation. Do you have developer onboarding in place? Do you have the right metrics in place? How do you leverage metrics? Is there a way to scale teams in an organic way, or do you always have to reinvent the wheel because wow, we have a new product and now our front-end teams becomes 20 people? Is this manageable? Probably not. So from the beginning, think in product teams, for example, right? And this is, I think, the major focus. And I would also personally believe that this is one of the fundamental differences between just good product and great organizations.
Okay, sounds good. And for people to get in touch with you guys, for you guys to help them with any kind of metric related or just in general tech due diligence, what's the best way for them to do that?
So, I mean, obviously you can find me on LinkedIn, right? That's the best way. Just reach out, send me a message. That's definitely possible. I also will added already a link to my Calendly that you find later, right? So book a session with me, definitely possible. Another way is I mentioned, or you mentioned before that I'm also leading this mentoring club. There's also a way, right, to get in touch with me for like some 30, 60-minute mentoring on these topics. So that's the ways we have.
Okay, great. And look, last question. And I want to first of all say thank you. It's been very enlightening, actually. And also, your real life experience actually puts that tangible, sometimes intangible metrics to actual some real life applications, which is which is refreshing. But look, as we wrap up this conversation, could you share one tip, and just one, for founders on how to effectively leverage metrics?
Not just talking about the metrics, but actually making it almost like a product yourself. So visualize it, evangelize it, and make it not something that is there because you have to have it and because others have it, but really make it part of your DNA. Right.
Okay.
So if let's say let's talk again about this conversion metrics, which are kind of boring, but it's always because everyone knows about it. If this is what you're looking into, make it part of every single conversation that you have, make it part of your management meetings, make it visible, bring it to the screens, right? Be proud about it. Show like the company in New Orleans meetings that here is the hockey stick and that's how we did it. We are proud of your engineering team because they unlocked this specific change in our on our metric here. I think that's the number one metric. So if you want to be a data-driven company, take it serious and make it a premium member, let's say, of your startup elements.
All right. Very, very, very good tip. Look, Bastian, thank you very much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure. And as mentioned, Bastian's Calendly will be in the description. So feel free to reach out to him and his team. But thank you very much, Bastian.
Thank you for having me, Hugo. It was a pleasure to be here.